My name is Daniel Carter, and if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have sworn there wasn't a single secret left between my brother and me. Growing up in a small Michigan town, Adam and I were inseparable, even when life tried to wedge its cold fingers between us. He was always the calm one, the sort of guy who never raised his voice and never lost his way. Me, I was the one who tested every boundary, the one who walked right up to the edge and sometimes leaned over just to see what would happen. Our parents, Michael and Teresa Carter, had raised us to value honesty above all else. My father, a high school biology teacher, always said, "Truth is like oxygen. You may not see it, but without it, you'll choke." For as long as I could remember, the Carter family had been built on that belief. Or so I thought. It was a typical September morning when everything started. I woke up early, sunlight dripping through the blinds in my small apartment above the old hardware store I managed. My phone buzzed with a message from Adam. "Hey, thinking about doing one of those DNA kits. Want to do it together? Just for fun?" I remember staring at the screen, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. It struck me as strange. Adam wasn't the type to indulge in trends or novelty. He'd never been curious about things like family trees or heritage percentages. That was more my kind of thing. Still, he sounded almost nervous. I texted back. "Sure. Why not?" That was it. No foreshadowing music, no ominous clouds rolling over the sky. Just two brothers agreeing to spit in a tube for a laugh. Our daily lives were the definition of routine. Adam worked as a paramedic in Grand Rapids. His shifts were long, unpredictable, and draining, but he loved the sense of purpose. He'd moved back home after college to help our mom when she was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. Even after she got better, he stayed. Said he liked being close just in case. Me, I'd tried leaving town twice. The first time, I'd packed my car and driven to Chicago with a vague plan of becoming a photographer. I lasted 6 months. The second time, I'd moved to Boston after a bad breakup, promising myself I wouldn't come crawling back. But after my third layoff in a year, I had to. There's always something magnetic about home, even if it sometimes felt like gravity pulling me down instead of holding me steady. My apartment was cluttered with boxes of old cameras, film canisters, and print proofs. Every evening after closing up the hardware store, I'd tinker with them. Adam said I was addicted to nostalgia, and maybe he was right. It wasn't the photography itself that hooked me, it was the hope of capturing something real, something lasting. The truth in a frame. That was what I thought the DNA test would be, another curiosity. Another little fact to slide into the family album. If you'd told me it would change everything I thought I knew, I would have laughed. The day we picked up the kits, I met Adam at our parents' old house on Maple Drive. Mom and Dad had downsized to a condo the year before, but they still owned the place. They'd left most of the furniture, so it felt like stepping into a time capsule. Adam was sitting at the kitchen table, the test boxes stacked neatly beside him. "Hey," he said, his smile a little too wide. "You ready?" "Ready as I'll ever be," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. I tore the plastic off my kit and read the instructions carefully, trying to act casual. But the way he kept rubbing his thumb over the barcode sticker made me pause. "You okay?" I asked. He shrugged. "Yeah. Just curious, I guess." It was a small thing, the way his voice caught on the word curious. A tiny crack in the surface. But I didn't question it. Not then. We filled the vials, sealed them up, and laughed about how gross it was. He joked that if either of us found out we were royalty, he'd expect half the inheritance. I told him he could have it all, as long as he didn't make me bow. Afterward, we ordered pizza from Angelo's and sat on the front porch, eating straight from the box. The sun slipped behind the trees, the cicadas humming like an invisible orchestra. It should have been just another night, but something in the air felt unsettled, like the way the sky goes quiet before a storm. I asked him, seriously, why now? Why the DNA kit out of nowhere? He picked at the crust, his gaze fixed on the street. "I don't know. Maybe it's just time to know. You ever feel like there's something people aren't telling you?" I shrugged. "Not really. But hey, maybe you're adopted. Explains why you're so damn nice." He laughed. but it didn't quite reach his eyes.
Yeah.
Maybe. We didn't talk about it again that night. But later, lying in bed, I replayed the conversation over and over. Something about the way he'd said "time to know" kept snagging in my thoughts like a burr on a sock. I told myself I was imagining it, that there was no secret to uncover. Our family had no scandals, no lost relatives. We were ordinary, predictable. In the days that followed, life went back to normal, or what passed for normal. I opened the store every morning at 7, rang up bolts and screws for the regulars, and restocked shelves. Sometimes I'd see Adam's ambulance flying down the main road, siren wailing, and I'd feel a stab of pride. He was doing something important. I was selling nails. The thought should have bothered me more than it did. But I'd long accepted that I wasn't built for heroics. Adam was the good son, the reliable one. I was the one who left and came back, the one who tried and failed. A week later, Mom called to remind me about Dad's birthday dinner. "Don't be late," she said, her voice warm but edged with that maternal sharpness. "And bring something other than potato chips this time." "I'll bring a cake," I promised. After we hung up, I caught myself staring at the DNA kit receipt on the kitchen counter. It felt like a countdown had started, but I didn't know what we were counting down to. I spent that afternoon cleaning my apartment, trying to ignore the nagging sense that something was coming. I couldn't explain why I felt it so strongly, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Adam's face on the porch. That look in his eyes, some mix of fear and determination. The ordinary world I'd always known, our simple, small-town life, suddenly felt like it was built on a fault line. One shift, and everything would collapse. The first time I held the DNA test results, my hands were shaking so badly, I thought the paper might tear. My brother, Ethan, was pacing across my living room like a caged animal. He'd always been the more level-headed of the two of us, taller, broader-shouldered, the one who talked our way out of trouble when we were teenagers. But that day, the tension etched into the lines around his mouth told me he was just as rattled as I was. It had all started as a casual idea, something fun to do over the holidays, maybe learn about our heritage. I'd ordered the test kits online after watching a string of ads promising to unlock the secrets of our ancestry. Ethan had rolled his eyes when the packages arrived in the mail, but he went along with it anyway. He even joked about finding out we were descended from pirates or royalty. None of us were prepared for what we discovered. The first line on the printed report looked ordinary enough, listing a breakdown of European ancestry percentages. But the second page, where the close relatives were listed, was where everything started to unravel. My eyes had locked onto the bold heading that read, "Immediate family matches." The first name on the list wasn't a surprise. Ethan. A 99.9% match as a sibling. But then there was another name. A name I didn't recognize. Daniel Harper, 99.9% match, sibling. What the hell does that mean? I'd whispered, barely able to form words. Ethan snatched the paper out of my hand, scanning it over and over as if repetition could force it to make sense. "I don't know," he said finally, voice hoarse. "I don't know who Daniel Harper is." "Do you?" I shook my head. The living room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. My ears were buzzing like 1,000 cicadas. All I could think was that this must be a mistake. Some clerical error. A glitch in the database. But when we called the testing company, the woman on the phone sounded annoyingly calm as she confirmed the match. "The results are highly accurate," she assured us. "It means you have another full sibling." I hung up without saying goodbye. Ethan slumped into the armchair by the window, rubbing his temples. We sat in silence for nearly an hour, neither of us sure what to say. My mind was spinning in a dozen directions at once. Our parents had never mentioned any other children. No adoption, no long-lost sibling stories. Nothing. Our family wasn't perfect. Whose is? But this was beyond anything I'd imagined. Eventually, Ethan spoke up, voice barely above a whisper. "There's only one way to figure this out." I already knew what he was thinking. Mom and Dad. We decided to confront them that evening. Ethan insisted we drive over together, as if our solidarity would keep us from falling apart. The ride to our parents' house felt surreal. Every landmark was familiar. Mrs. Goldstein's rose bushes, the faded blue mailbox with a dent from when Ethan hit it backing out of the driveway as a teenager, but nothing felt right. It was like the whole neighborhood existed in a parallel universe where none of this had happened. Mom greeted us at the door with her usual warm smile. She looked so ordinary in her soft cardigan and house slippers, as if she hadn't been harboring a secret that could blow our family apart. Dad was in the kitchen making coffee. He called out a hello over his shoulder, unaware that his sons were about to upend everything. We didn't waste time on small talk. Ethan pulled the test results from his jacket and set them on the kitchen counter. Mom's eyes flicked over the heading, and I saw the moment the color drained from her face. Dad came around the corner, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He took one look at the papers and froze. "I think you'd better sit down," Mom said, her voice trembling. The four of us gathered around the kitchen table. Nobody spoke for a long time. Outside the window, the winter sky was growing dark, casting long shadows across the floor. I felt like a little kid again, about to be scolded for something I didn't even understand. Finally, Mom looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I need you to know that we love you both more than anything," she began. It was the kind of sentence that never ends well. "What is this?" I demanded, tapping the results. My voice sounded rough, brittle, like it might break if I wasn't careful. Mom's hands were trembling as she reached for Dad's. He didn't look at her. He just stared down at the table, jaw clenched so tight I thought he might shatter a tooth. "There was someone before," she said finally. "Before your father and I were married." Ethan shot me a look. I swallowed hard. "Someone before? What does that mean?" Mom closed her eyes. "I was young. I was engaged to someone else. His name was Mark Harper. We had a child together. Daniel." The name felt like a punch to the gut. Daniel Harper. The stranger, who was somehow our brother. "But you never told us," Ethan whispered. His voice sounded small, like he was 12 again. "You never said a word." Mom wiped her eyes. "We thought it was for the best. Mark and I broke up before Daniel was born. He took the baby and moved out west. I never saw them again." "But why didn't you tell us?" I pressed, my pulse hammering in my throat. "Because it was complicated," Dad said finally, his voice hoarse. "We thought he was out of our lives. We thought it would only confuse you." I felt like the walls were closing in. A brother we never knew existed. A lie that had lasted my entire life. Ethan looked as shell-shocked as I felt. "What are we supposed to do with this?" I demanded. Nobody answered. That night, Ethan and I went back to my apartment, too stunned to process everything. We sat in silence for hours, the DNA report between us like a bomb that had already exploded. Around midnight, Ethan finally spoke. "We have to find him," he said. I nodded, though the idea terrified me. "But what if he doesn't want to be found? Then at least we'll know." He was right. We couldn't pretend we didn't know the truth anymore. The only way forward was through. The next morning, I called the DNA company again. I asked for whatever contact information they were allowed to share. The woman on the phone sounded hesitant, but eventually confirmed that Daniel Harper lived in Oregon. She couldn't give me a phone number without his consent, but offered to send him a message on our behalf. When I hung up, my hands were still trembling. Ethan looked at me, brows furrowed. "Did you do it?"
"Yeah."
"They'll let him know we're trying to reach him." Good. The rest of the week passed in a haze. I went through the motions at work, answering emails and pretending to care about the latest quarterly report. But every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt into my throat. Part of me hoped Daniel would respond right away. Part of me dreaded it. Finally, on Friday evening, the email came. The subject line was simple: "Contact request response, Daniel Harper." I opened it with Ethan sitting beside me, our shoulders pressed together like we were bracing for impact. "Hello," it began. "I received your message. I've always wondered if I had other siblings. I'd like to talk." I didn't realize I was crying until Ethan reached over and squeezed my hand. "We're doing this," he said quietly. "Together." I nodded, wiping my face. For the first time all week, I felt a flicker of something besides dread, something like hope. I didn't know what we would find when we met Daniel. Whether he'd feel like family or a stranger. Whether this revelation would heal old wounds or rip open new ones. But there was no turning back now. The truth was out, and it was bigger than either of us had imagined. I sat in my car for what felt like an hour, the DNA report clutched in my trembling hands. My brother, Michael, had stormed off after our argument. The heat between us felt heavier than the summer air pressing against the windshield. Every second that passed was an echo of that one line in the report, probability of full sibling relationship, 0%, pounding in my head. I thought of the night we'd ordered those DNA kits, some ridiculous marketing email that had made it seem fun. Discover your heritage. It had promised in cheerful fonts, as if family was just a novelty to be unwrapped. Michael had laughed as we filled the tubes with spit, promising to bet on who had more Scandinavian DNA. I'd almost forgotten about it until the email notification pinged me awake at 2 a.m. Now I couldn't think about anything else. I took a shaky breath and unlocked my phone. My mother's contact stared back at me. Mom. Just 3 letters that suddenly felt like a code I didn't know how to decipher. Was she my mom? Was she his mom? The test didn't say I had no relation to Michael. It said we were half-siblings. Half. Like a house with a hidden wall. I called her anyway. My voice sounded far away when she picked up. Hey, Mom. David? Is everything okay? Her tone was cheerful, but I heard the undercurrent of fatigue. She'd been working double shifts at the hospital. Ever since Dad passed 5 years ago, she'd thrown herself into work like it was the only way to outrun grief. Yeah, I lied. Can I come by later? I have something I need to ask you. Of course, honey. Is Michael coming too? I swallowed. No. Just me. I hung up before she could ask more questions. I knew Michael wouldn't come. After we read the results, he'd shoved the papers back in the envelope and told me it was probably an error. But I'd seen his eyes. The same disbelief, the same fear. He hadn't called me since. The rest of the drive to Mom's was a blur of streetlights and questions I couldn't answer. What did this mean for us? Did it mean Michael was my half-brother? Or was I the one who didn't belong? When she opened the door, her hair was still pulled back in a messy bun from her shift. She gave me a tired smile. You look pale. Come in, I'll make coffee. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten thousands of meals, birthday cakes, late-night cereal. It looked the same. The magnet with the cartoon chicken still held up a grocery list. But I felt like an intruder. She handed me a mug, then sat across from me, her hands folded neatly. I'd never noticed how much older she looked lately. What's wrong? She asked. I didn't know how to begin. So I just blurted it out. Michael and I took a DNA test. She went very still. Her eyes flicked to the manila envelope on the table. And it says we're not full brothers. Her face didn't change, but I could see something shifting behind her eyes, a flicker of something like dread. It says we have different fathers. Silence filled every corner of the kitchen. The old refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, and I waited for her to deny it. But she didn't. She took a long, shaky breath. I always knew this day might come. I swallowed hard. So it's true? She nodded. I never wanted to hurt you boys. Her voice cracked. For a moment, she looked as fragile as I felt. Your father and we had separated briefly before Michael was born. I was with someone else. Just for a little while. Then your dad and I reconciled. We decided it didn't matter. He loved you both like his own. He never wanted you to know. I tried to understand. All those years, all the times Dad had looked at us the same way, like we were his sons. He'd never let it show. But why didn't you tell us? I whispered. Because you were his. Both of you. In every way that mattered. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hug her. Part of me wanted to run out the door. I stood up instead. I have to go. David. I just need some time. I walked out into the muggy evening air, feeling like gravity was stronger than it used to be. I drove around aimlessly until I found myself parked in front of Michael's apartment building. His truck was there. He hadn't left. I texted him, "We need to talk." 2 minutes later, he opened the door. He looked as wrecked as I felt. His eyes were bloodshot. He didn't say anything, just stepped aside so I could come in. We sat on the worn couch, staring at our shoes. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I guess we should have expected something. Dad always joked that I was too tall to be related to you." I almost laughed, but the ache in my chest was too big. "I talked to Mom," I said. "And she confirmed it." He nodded slowly, like he'd already known. "Does it change anything?" I asked, afraid of the answer. He looked up, and I saw the same pain in his eyes that I felt. "No," he said quietly. "You're still my brother." The relief that flooded me was so sharp I almost cried. "Yeah," I said, my voice breaking. "You're still mine too." We sat there in silence, letting the truth settle. It felt heavy, but not as suffocating as before. A part of me knew that everything would be different now, that we'd never look at our family exactly the same way. But another part of me, maybe the most important part, believed that some bonds were bigger than blood. Eventually, Michael spoke again. "I don't want Mom to feel like she ruined everything."
"She didn't," I said.
"She just didn't know how to tell us." He nodded. "We should probably let her know we're okay." I agreed. Even though I wasn't sure if I was okay yet, I stayed a while longer. We talked about old memories, camping trips, Dad's terrible barbecue experiments, the time we'd broken Mom's vase and blamed it on the cat. For a moment, it felt almost normal. When I finally left, the night air felt a little less suffocating. On the drive home, I realized something. Even though the test had upended everything I thought I knew, it hadn't changed who I was. Or who we were to each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I remember the moment I pressed the button to join the video call with David as though my entire existence had been counting down to that instant. My finger hovered over the mouse, my heart drumming an uneven rhythm, each beat laced with dread and something close to hope. On the other end, my brother's face flickered into view, strained, pale, but determined. We had both received the notification that our DNA results were ready. We had promised to open them together, no matter how bad it might be. David swallowed. "Ethan," he said, voice taut as a wire. "Are you ready for this?" I almost laughed because no, I was not ready. Nothing could have prepared me. But I nodded. "Let's just do it." We had spent the past week speculating. Maybe we had a hidden grandparent or some long-lost cousin. Maybe there'd be nothing unusual at all, and all this tension was for nothing. But deep down, I'd felt the shape of something monstrous waiting for us. A black shadow coiled around the roots of our family tree. I clicked on the results link. The website loaded, achingly slow, until the summary page finally came up. My eyes scanned the percentages, the ancestral breakdowns, Scandinavian heritage, Southern European, a dash of North African, and then they landed on a bolded sentence under the Close Relatives tab. No immediate full sibling match detected. I felt my breath lock in my throat. For a second, I didn't understand. The words blurred. I tried to refocus. David Miller, predicted relationship, half-brother. My lungs emptied. "David," I rasped. "Look at yours." He was already staring, lips moving silently as he read. His face went blank. "Half-brother," he whispered, incredulous. "That can't be right. There's no way." I searched for some explanation. A clerical error. A glitch. Anything. But the raw data was there, unyielding in its finality. Our entire childhood, those memories of shared birthdays and the pact that we were in everything together, cracked apart in a single instant. "Maybe it's a mistake," I said, my voice hollow. "These tests, they can get it wrong sometimes." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying to both of us. I remembered the hushed arguments late at night when Mom didn't think we could hear her. The way Dad would go silent if we asked too many questions about the time before David was born. That look that sometimes flickered in my mother's eyes, something like regret. David rubbed his temples, eyes squeezed shut. "Ethan, do you realize what this means? One of us doesn't have the same father." I felt sick. My mind raced through possibilities. Did Mom have an affair? Or had there been some other secret no one ever thought we'd uncover? David's face hardened. I need to talk to her, he said. His voice had shifted. No longer the easy warmth of my brother, but something colder, brittle. I need to hear her say it. I nodded slowly, the ache in my chest blooming into something enormous. I'll go with you. We drove in near silence to our mother's house, the streets a blur of headlights and damp asphalt. Every red light felt like a reprieve I didn't deserve. By the time we pulled into her driveway, I felt like I'd aged a decade. She met us at the door in her bathrobe, her expression curious and a little alarmed. Boys? What's wrong? David held up his phone. We took a DNA test, he said, voice low. It says we're half-brothers. The blood drained from her face. She looked from him to me, her lips parting soundlessly. In that instant, the truth was already written across her expression, clear as glass. She didn't deny it. She just closed her eyes, as though bracing for impact. Come inside, she whispered. We sat around the kitchen table, the same table where she'd packed our school lunches, where we dyed Easter eggs. I noticed her hands trembling as she set down a cup of tea she never touched. I was going to tell you one day, she began. But the years kept passing, and it never seemed like the right time. Tell us what? David said, voice shaking. That your father, David, your father isn't the same man as Ethan's. The words detonated between us. I felt the world tilt on its axis. For a moment, no one spoke. I looked at her, searching her face for any sign that she might take it back. But her eyes were wet with tears, and I knew it was true. Who is my father? David asked finally. She pressed a napkin to her mouth. His name was Robert Bennett. We were together before I met your dad. When I got pregnant, he didn't want to be involved. A few months later, I met Martin, and he told me he'd raise you as his own. I thought maybe it was better this way. David pushed back from the table, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. He paced to the window, breathing hard. You let me believe, his voice broke. You let me believe he was my father for 30 years.
She sobbed.
I didn't want you to feel unwanted. I thought of all the times David and Dad had argued, the times he'd said he never felt like he measured up. My stomach lurched. What about me? I asked quietly. Am I? She shook her head.
No, Ethan.
Martin is your biological father. A part of me felt relief. The other part felt something uglier, guilt that my relief came at David's expense. David turned, his eyes rimmed red. I need some air. He left the house, the door slamming so hard the walls shook. I followed a few minutes later, finding him sitting on the hood of his car, staring up at the sky. I don't even know who I am anymore, he said, voice ragged. I sat beside him, even though the cold metal bit through my jeans. You're still my brother, I said. That's the only thing I'm sure of. He closed his eyes. I want to find him, he whispered. I need to know why he didn't want me. I nodded, feeling the weight of everything we'd just uncovered pressing down on us. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it would never look the same again. That night, as I tried to sleep, I thought of how a single test kit, just a bit of saliva in a tube, had unraveled our entire world. And though the truth had shattered so much, part of me felt something almost like hope. At least now, we finally knew. When I look back now, the moment when Brandon and I sat across from each other in that dimly lit diner feels like a lifetime ago. The air had smelled of burnt coffee and old vinyl, but in that moment, all I could sense was the heavy weight of the truth between us. It had been 2 weeks since the results came in, 2 weeks of raw, aching silence, of texts that went unanswered, of phone calls we both let ring into the void. We needed time to absorb it, to make sense of a reality neither of us had ever imagined. I remember exactly how Brandon looked that evening, his hair disheveled, like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes rimmed in red. But when he finally raised his gaze to meet mine, there was no anger there, just something that almost looked like relief. For years, we'd both carried around questions we never dared to ask. Why he looked so little like Dad, why there were always whispers at family reunions, why Mom seemed to grow tense when anyone mentioned our early childhood. Brandon cleared his throat and set his coffee cup down. His voice was low but steady. So we're really only half-brothers. He didn't phrase it as a question, because by then, there was no doubt left. Yes. My own voice came out thin and brittle. Mom confirmed it when I finally confronted her. She said she was young, and things were complicated. She thought it would be easier to pretend. My hands trembled as I pushed my phone across the table, so he could see the email I'd saved, the one where she finally told me the name of the man who was his biological father. A man neither of us had ever met. Brandon stared at the screen for a long time. When he finally looked up, there was a small, tired smile on his face. I always felt like I didn't belong, he admitted. Like everyone else was part of some club I didn't have the password to. I guess this explains it. We sat there in silence, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but necessary. It was the silence of two brothers standing at the edge of something enormous, something that could either split us apart or draw us closer together. "I'm still your brother," I said after a while, my voice cracking. "That doesn't change." He nodded, but his eyes were glassy. "I know," he whispered. "I know." The days that followed were a blur of difficult conversations. Mom cried when I told her we'd gotten the results. She said she'd always intended to tell Brandon eventually, but the right moment never seemed to come. Dad, our stepdad, really, sat stoically at the kitchen table as Mom recounted the years she'd spent terrified that the truth would destroy everything. He looked tired but unsurprised. Later, I would learn that he'd known all along, but had promised Mom he'd never say a word. It would have been easy to let anger consume me, to lash out at the lies, the secrets, the way our childhoods had been built on a foundation of silence. But watching Brandon process it all, I realized we didn't have to let this break us. We could choose, together, what this new reality meant. We started small. He came over to my apartment that weekend, and we ordered takeout just like we used to when we were kids. We watched a movie, neither of us really paying attention, and when it was over, he turned to me with that same tired smile. "Thanks," he said, "for not shutting me out." I shrugged, blinking back tears. "You're my brother," I told him again. No test changes that. Over the next few weeks, Brandon reached out to the man whose name Mom had given us, his biological father. At first, there were just emails, tentative, cautious. Then a phone call. Eventually, he agreed to meet in person. I offered to go with him, but he said he needed to do it alone. When he came back, he looked lighter, somehow, like a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying had finally been set down. "He seems nice," Brandon said quietly when I asked how it went. "But he's not, he's not Dad. I don't think I want a big relationship with him. But at least I know now." I understood. Knowing was a kind of freedom, even if it came tangled up in pain. As summer turned to fall, the shock gradually receded, leaving space for something gentler. Acceptance, maybe. Or the simple, undeniable bond of years spent growing up under the same roof, no matter what biology said. We found our own way to make sense of it. We started referring to each other as half-brothers, but we said it with a wry humor, almost like an inside joke. Because the truth was, it didn't feel like half anything. It felt like family. The rest of the family needed time, too. Our cousins had questions, some of them insensitive. Our aunts and uncles murmured their surprise. But eventually, the novelty wore off and people stopped asking. What mattered was that Brandon and I knew where we stood. What mattered was that, after everything, we were still brothers. I'd be lying if I said it didn't change us.
It did.
But in ways I couldn't have predicted. We started being more honest with each other about everything. About our fears, our regrets, our hopes for the future. It was like once the biggest secret had come to light, there was no point in hiding anything else. One night, a few months later, Brandon and I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the darkness. He took a long sip of his drink, then turned to me with a thoughtful expression. He said, "I think part of me always resented you a little. You always seemed so sure of yourself, so belonging. and I was just adrift. I felt a pang of guilt, but he waved it off. "I'm not saying that to make you feel bad," he continued. I think this was the thing I needed to understand why I felt that way. And now that I do, I don't feel it anymore." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. In the quiet, I realized that this was what closure looked like. Not some grand moment where everything suddenly made sense, but a series of small understandings that, over time, built something stronger. Before Brandon left that night, he hugged me. Not the quick, half-hearted hug we used to give each other out of habit, but a real, solid embrace. When he pulled back, he looked me in the eye. "Thanks," he said simply. "For what?" I asked. "For being my brother," he said. And in that moment, I knew that no DNA test, no hidden history, no long-buried secret could ever undo that truth. In the months that followed, life settled back into a new kind of normal. We still had questions about the past, about what our family really was, but the urgency to answer them had faded. We had each other, and somehow that was enough. Looking back now, I realized that the test didn't destroy us. It revealed us. It stripped away everything that wasn't true, and what was left was the bond we'd built all our lives. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. It's strange how quiet the world seems after a storm like that. I sat on the porch of my brother's house in Oregon, the late autumn air brushing against my arms as the wind carried the scent of wet leaves and pine. Josh was inside, finishing a call with our mother. Or rather, the woman we now knew was only his biological mother. Since the results came back, we'd been navigating the fallout slowly, like walking barefoot over broken glass. Every step forward was careful, painful, but necessary. The DNA test had shattered our foundation, but it didn't destroy us. The days following our discovery were filled with silence more than anything else. Not angry silence, just confusion. Josh, always the more grounded of the two of us, had initially been furious, slamming doors and shouting into the void. I, on the other hand, felt like I had drifted out of my own life. Like I was looking in from the outside, watching a stranger wear my name and my memories. We'd finally sat down and talked 3 days later. Really talked. On his back deck with 2 beers and no expectations. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above the wind. "You don't owe me an apology." "I do," he replied. "I didn't want to believe it, and for a minute I blamed you. Like you were trying to take something from me." "I get it," I said. Because I felt the same. Like suddenly I didn't belong in my own family. He nodded, eyes on the yard. "But you do, Mark. You're my brother. Test or no test." That was the first real moment of healing. Over the next week, we reached out to both of our parents. Our dad, well, my dad, was the hardest. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to gaslight or minimize. He just cried. "It was a mistake," he told me. "One night, your mother and I were going through a rough time and he stopped, shaking his head. I never stopped loving you like my son. I still do." He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "I forgive you," I told him, and I meant it. But I also told him I needed space. The kind that lets scars form properly. Josh's mom, well, the woman who raised us both, was more complicated. She hadn't known either. Or at least, that's what she claimed. But when she saw the test results, her eyes welled with guilt. "All this time," she whispered, "I never doubted. But there were moments, small things. You were quieter. Your eyes were a little different. I thought maybe it was just personality. But now I wonder if part of me always knew." She held me and cried like she was losing a son. Maybe in some way, she felt like she had. But I didn't pull away. Because no matter what the test said, she was the woman who'd kissed my scraped knees and taught me to ride a bike. That had to count for something. In the weeks that followed, Josh and I redefined what brotherhood meant. It wasn't blood. It wasn't shared chromosomes. It was 29 years of laughter, arguments, camping trips, late-night video games, and covering for each other when we were late for curfew. That stuff couldn't be erased by a piece of paper. Still, I was curious about my biological roots. After some deep digging, I finally tracked down a man named Henry Dawson, my biological father. He lived in Montana, owned a small ranch, and had no idea I existed. I wrote him a letter. It took him 2 weeks to respond. When he did, it wasn't what I expected. He wanted to meet. So I went. The man who opened the door looked exactly like me, taller, broader in the shoulders with my eyes. His handshake was firm but hesitant. We sat for hours. He told me about his life, the affair he had with my mother, how he'd moved on never knowing she was pregnant. He apologized a dozen times. "I'm not here to blame you," I told him. "I just want to understand." And I did. Slowly. We didn't become father and son overnight, but we opened a door neither of us knew we'd been missing. Josh and I also did something we hadn't done in years. We took a road trip. Just the two of us, like old times. No destination, just music, long talks, and lots of silence that felt less heavy than before. We stopped at diners, hiked trails, and somewhere between Colorado and Utah, we made a pact. "We don't let this define us," Josh said. "We use it." Use it how? To live bigger, braver, more honest. I laughed. "Who are you, a motivational speaker?" "Shut up," he grinned. We came back changed. Not broken. Not lost. Just different. In some ways, I'd gained more than I'd lost. I found a father I didn't know I had. I deepened a bond with my brother that nothing could shake. And most of all, I found myself outside of labels, outside of DNA. Josh and I co-wrote an article for a national magazine. Titled Brotherhood by More Than Blood. It went viral. Our story resonated with people, adopted children, estranged siblings, blended families. We were invited to speak on a podcast, then a panel. Suddenly, our pain had purpose. And we gave that purpose a name. The Unshakable Project, a nonprofit we started to support families dealing with identity revelations, late adoptions, and DNA surprises. 1 year later, we stood on a TEDx stage together, telling our story not as victims, but as survivors, as brothers, as advocates for truth, healing, and the bonds that go beyond biology. Looking back, I realized that tests didn't destroy us, it set us free. It tore down the illusions and gave us something raw, real, and worth rebuilding. My name is Mark Dawson. My brother's name is Josh Reynolds. We were raised as brothers, and we choose each other again and again.